The Intercity Express, the pride of Germany's rail system. Sleek, super fast, the safest in the country. At 10:58, on the morning of Thursday, June 4th, 1998, Intercity Express 884 was 35 miles north of Hamburg, approaching Eschede Station. As usual, it was right on time. Less than a minute later, everything changed. As the locomotive passes under a road overpass, the 13 carriages behind it twist out of control, sending it off the tracks and into a concrete pillar. 93 are dead. Hundreds more are injured. Cleanup crews tried desperately to lift debris from 2 railroad cars crushed under tons of concrete, which came crashing down on impact. Anyone trapped inside the cars have only a minimal chance of survival. Minimal chance of survival. For Ken Cuttle, these words have special meaning. Although he is half a world away on the west coast of Canada, what happened in Eschede, Germany triggers powerful memories, still fresh, no more than a decade old. February 8th, 1986. Via Rail Supercontinental travels east through the foothills of Alberta, about 16 kilometers from a town called Hinton, northeast of Jasper National Park. 124 passengers and crew are on board. Ken Cuttle is in the dining car just finishing an early breakfast with another passenger. Ken is on his way to Edmonton to see about a job and to visit his son. He has decided to take the train because he doesn't feel safe flying. The other passenger asks Ken to join him at a seat in one of the forward passenger cars.
And I said, no, let's go up in the dome car and see what's happening. It's going to be daylight soon and we'll get a good view of the mountains.
Morton Peterson is heading home after a business trip to Victoria.
I heard the head of the dining car coming through the coach saying, first call for breakfast. And I thought, wow, don't be so lazy. Get up.
Lori Hicks is returning home from a ski trip in Jasper with several of her friends. It is her first time traveling by train.
It was really fun on the train. You got to walk around and meet people and talk to people, and it was a blast.
I saw lights of an oncoming train quite clearly, and I assumed we were on a double track.
Heading west on a 16-kilometer stretch of double track is a CN freight, 2 kilometers long, 3 engines, 114 cars, carrying a load of grain, pipe, sulfur, and ethylene dichloride. A computerized signal system called Central Traffic Control allows dispatchers in Edmonton to monitor train movements and guide engineers through a series of remote-controlled signals and switches. Where the double track turns to single, a switch has already been set to allow the passenger train to pass through. Some 4 kilometers before the switch, the freight passes a red-amber signal light, warning it to slow down. The freight hits the junction of double and single track with no sign of slowing down, let alone stopping. The impact of the heavy engine bends the bar which trips the switch. The freight pitches onto the single track as it rounds a gentle curve just past the junction and is now barreling on toward the passenger train.
I assumed we were on a double track. Whatever was coming was going to pass by us. I suppose I saw these lights maybe a minute before I realized that, of course, we weren't on a double track.
I just laid down on the seat and went to sleep in the dome car. And Judy said, I can't sleep up here. It was almost like fate, all the little things that made you be where you were when it happened.
The waiter had just placed at breakfast of bacon and eggs in front of me when the crash came.
It was like the tide coming in. All hell was let loose. There was all things coming towards us. Grain cars, locomotives, everything.
Me and this lady were hurtled down the length of the coach, banged up against the bulkhead, and hurtled back. If I'd stayed in my bunk, I would have been killed in there.
I didn't know what had happened. I just saw people all around me, either laying there or crawling out the roof.
And then I was picked up and literally thrown to the back of the car. Glass smashing all around, the smell of burning, the smell of diesel.
In seconds, a mountain of twisted metal is carved out of the colliding trains. Coaches and track are scattered like toys. Grain cars weighing several thousand kilograms are tossed 25 meters in the air. In the blink of an eye, with little time for more than a strangled scream, the lives of the people in the first car are snuffed out. Not far away, surviving passengers are fighting for theirs.
As I looked up, the glass of the roof was cracked. I just jumped up on a seat, smashed my head through the roof.
So I just dove out the shattered window, head first.
People shouting, people screaming.
I could see sub-movement through the rest of the windows in the car.
I didn't feel panicky. I just got up and walked down the stairs, and we just jumped out a hole in the wall into about, I don't know, 3 or 4 feet of wheat.
I remember I pulled a girl up after me, and there we were, 16 feet above the ground, and somebody said, "What are we going to do?" And I said, "God's sake, let's jump." And somebody was shouting out, clear the train, the diesel's going to blow."
The propane stoves in the kitchen ignited everything.
If you hadn't got clear at that very moment, or within those seconds after the crash, you'd had it.
It is Canada's worst train wreck in nearly 40 years. Most of the victims remain trapped in the 2 forward coaches, crushed beneath tons of scorched steel.
I honestly wasn't prepared for what I saw. I was a British Royal Marine for 14 years. I thought I'd seen it all in Northern Ireland, but it was a real shock at first sight. The restaurant car was covered and burnt. In fact, there were still 2 people burning in the window. They seemed to be hugging each other. There was a lady that had been driven through the floor of the train. There wasn't a mark on her body at all, but the bottom part of the body was spread over about 3 meters.
There was lots of people in a bad way. You know, there was a lot of people in shock. One girl wondered where her friend was, if she'd survived, and I believe it turned out that she hadn't in the end.
There were people burning to death and smothering and screaming. That would be the most horrible death I could imagine. I came out of the war having heard several people scream to death until suddenly they're cut off. And I heard it again at Hinton.
I think the screaming was the worst part of it, was listening to the people in there screaming and you couldn't do a thing about it, and the fire was coming and it was melting on them, and you couldn't help them.
So I made my way down alongside the train towards the rear, as far away from the screaming as I could. And by the time I got to the tail end of the train, the screaming had all stopped.
The first day there was a big billow of smoke and a cloud, a yellow cloud. They put the fires out, but this wisp of smoke stayed there. All the time I was there, it stayed there. And it seemed, as soon as we'd finished looking for the bodies, it just seemed to disappear.
16 passengers and 7 crewmen are dead. A makeshift crisis center is set up in the town of Hinton to treat the injured. Friends and relatives gather at the Via Rail station in Edmonton, waiting for survivors to arrive, hoping to recognize a familiar face as the buses unload. For some, it is a joyous reunion, a rush of relief. For them, the waiting is over. But for others, there is only the question, why? An inquiry into the crash involves 3 months of testimony from over 150 witnesses. But evidence is sketchy. Both engineers are dead. Much of the physical evidence is destroyed when the trains collide. The only surviving crew member, the conductor, reports losing radio contact with his engineer shortly before the crash. Failing to come up with a clear cause for the disaster, the inquiry puts it down to human failure.
I think it was about 3 days later, after the crash, the magnitude of what I was seeing was really, really apparent. I looked around at the wreckage and it looked like a toy train set, just mangled.
I get my scrapbook out, have a look through it, and then I realise how lucky I am. I keep reminding myself, you know, there goes the lucky guy. But who decides on who chooses whom? We never know, do we? A lot of people, they get in certain situations and they give up. And that's when there's no hope. If you don't give up, there's always a chance, isn't there? I was in the Marines during the Second World War, and I've been in action a few times, and this was, you know, on a par with that.
Judy, we lived right beside each other. So we were really good friends, and she died on that trip. She was sitting in the seat that we were supposed to be sitting in, and I was up in the dome car. I think that was the hardest part of the trip too, is learning is you had to live without your friend, your best friend, after all those years.
They've erected a monument now on the exact spot where the crash took place. I've been down there. The trains usually blow the whistle when they pass the monument, some sign of respect. It's the same as when I went back to Normandy on the 50th anniversary of the landing. You go, you say a prayer, you think of the unfortunate people. It's nice to be able to do that. It's something that you never forget. I've been on the train since, a couple of times. The only disaster I had then was I took a full roll of films and none of them turned out.